Good evening. I'm Judy Woodruff. On the NewsHour tonight, a damning report. New York's Attorney General finds Governor Andrew Cuomo sexually harassed multiple women. He denies the claims, defending his actions, while President Biden and others call on him to resign. Then a new push by the Biden administration to help those facing evictions, targeting those most at risk of losing their homes. And wildfire inequality, how worsening wildfires in California's wine country threaten low-wage farm workers.
Grapes don't like smoke. In the past, certain wineries might be granted access to their vineyards even if they fell in evacuation zones. Workers might find themselves trying to save the grapes near wildfires while potentially endangering themselves.
All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
Pediatric Surgeon, Volunteer, Topiary Artist, a Raymond James Financial Advisor, tailors advice to help you live your life. Life well planned.
For 25 years, Consumer Cellular's goal has been to provide wireless service that helps people communicate and connect. We offer a variety of no-contract plans, and our U.S.-based customer service team can help find one that fits you. To learn more, visit consumercellular.tv.
Johnson & Johnson, BNSF Railway.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
We have two big stories leading tonight. The Biden administration moves to help renters in targeted areas facing eviction after a national ban on evictions expired. We will look at what that means in a moment. But first, we turn our focus to New York, where the state's attorney general accuses Governor Andrew Cuomo of sexually harassing multiple women. It has sparked a cascade of calls for his resignation, including from President Biden this afternoon, and expedited an impeachment investigation.
The independent investigation has concluded that Governor Andrew Cuomo sexually harassed multiple women and in doing so violated federal and state law.
It was the New York State Attorney General, Democrat Letitia James, who announced the damning findings. Her investigators today published a 165-page report, which concluded that Governor Cuomo did sexually harass a number of current and former New York State employees. The report says Cuomo did so through unwelcome and non-consensual touching, and by making offensive comments of a suggestive and sexual nature. It also says that Cuomo's conduct extended to members of the public.
This investigation has revealed conduct that corrodes the very fabric and character of our state government and shines light on injustice that can be present at the highest levels of government.
Investigators wrote about Cuomo's conduct toward 11 women and included some episodes that had not been reported previously, including the harassment of a state trooper assigned to his security detail. The instances of non-consensual touching included unwanted hugs and kisses, but also the groping of women's buttocks and breasts. Employment attorney Ann Clark is one of the Attorney General's lead investigators.
We found all 11 women to be credible. There was corroboration to varying degrees.
Another investigator, June Kim, spoke to their findings about the toxic work environment around the governor.
The executive chamber's culture of fear and flirtation, intimidation and intimacy, abuse and affection created a work environment ripe for harassment.
In a video message today, Cuomo argued that he has long had a habit of giving other people hugs and kisses, but responded this way to the report's findings about groping and inappropriate comments.
I never touched anyone inappropriately or made inappropriate sexual advances. I am 63 years old. I've lived my entire adult life in public view. That is just not who I am.
Still, reaction from other New York political leaders was swift. The state's 2 U.S. senators, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, both Democrats, reiterated their calls on Cuomo to resign. Before today, President Biden had said that he too would call for Cuomo's resignation if the Attorney General's investigation confirmed the allegations against Cuomo. Mr. Biden weighed in late today.
I think he should resign. I understand that the state legislature may decide to impeach. I don't know that for a fact.
Cuomo is also the subject of an impeachment investigation in the state assembly over this and other scandals. Attorney General James pledged today to provide the assembly with any relevant evidence from her investigation. And we turn now to Karen DeWitt. She is New York State Public Radio's Capitol Bureau Chief in Albany. Karen DeWitt, welcome to the NewsHour. Just how compelling,
thanks, Judy.
Absolutely. How compelling is the evidence that the Attorney General presents in this report?
Well, you know, I found all of these allegations pretty compelling. And most of them we knew about when they first became public late in March. I covered them. I talked to some of the women. But I have to say, all in one place, the way this report put them out, it was deeply shocking to see all of these allegations that were pretty well corroborated. And what one really struck me was, and I think because it was new, we hadn't heard of it, was this incident of the state trooper. She was pulled out of the ranks by Cuomo, chosen to be his bodyguard. Usually the superintendent of the state police does that, so that's highly unusual. And then, according to the report, she was subject to inappropriate touching, questions from him about advice on getting a girlfriend, asking her, why wasn't she wearing a dress? And I think all of that combined, was really very devastating.
And you said much of it is corroborated, so there's evidence in terms of what other people said to back up these allegations.
Yeah, well, I know in this, highly politicized environment, people might say, well, the Attorney General, she's just saying this, but they had thousands of pages of documents, emails, texts, photos, and in many cases, they had corroborating witnesses. In the case of the state trooper, there were corroborating witnesses of other troopers. So they definitely did a very solid job of backing up all of these allegations and saying that, concluding that they believed them.
And Karen DeWitt, Governor Cuomo came back with a pre-recorded statement in which he very vociferously denied all this, said that he learned to hug and kiss people from his parents. It's the way he's been as a politician all his life. How does all that square with what the Attorney General is saying?
Well, it does seem at odds, but I think Governor Cuomo is hoping that the public still sees him as just a little over a year ago. Remember, he was on television every day as sort of the de facto leader of the nation during the COVID-19 pandemic, the first big wave of the pandemic. And I think what he's saying to people is, that's the real me. You saw me on television every day. I am not this guy. I am not a serial sexual harasser. And I think that was what he was trying to convey with this pre-taped message.
So tell us where this goes from here. This report, with all this damning information from the Attorney General, what happens next?
Well, I think it goes without saying from what the governor said, he is not resigning. He says he still has a lot of work to do. But there is an Assembly impeachment inquiry happening. And like today, the Assembly Speaker said that is going to be expedited. The Assembly Speaker, who previously did not call on Cuomo to resign, is now saying he's lost confidence in Cuomo and Cuomo is not fit to be in office. Also, the Albany County DA, David Soares, announced late today that in fact, he confirmed that there's an ongoing criminal investigation and he's asking victims to come forward. So if, that were to come to fruition and the governor were to be indicted, I think that would be more very serious trouble for him.
Do you have a sense of which one of these processes would move more quickly? I mean, are we looking at something that's going to take months and months or what? What do you hear?
I think it's going to be sooner than later. It seemed like after the first allegations came out, things were dragging, but now things I think are going to go at pretty lightning speed here.
Does he have defenders?
Well, his family so far has defended him, one would hope that your family would, but nobody immediately comes to mind right now who is defending him, frankly. So he's really all alone on this issue. And in some ways, I think he's trying to turn that on his head and say, look, if all the elected officials are against me, hey, I must be doing something right. He's also said, I'm a victim of cancel culture. So he might be able to turn around the fact that he's really all alone right now on this.
Well, watching it very closely, Karen DeWitt, New York State Public Radio, the Capitol Bureau Chief. Karen, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And Karen Hinton was questioned by the New York Attorney General's investigators as part of their probe. She came forward earlier this year accusing Governor Cuomo of touching her inappropriately in 2000. She served as an aide to him when he was the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. And Karen Hinton joins me now. It's very good to have you with us. Ms. Hinton, tell us a little more about what happened exactly. It was around the year 2000. Remind us when it was, what happened.
The end of 2000, we had done a media event in Los Angeles. And after the event, he asked me to come up to his hotel room to talk about the day, what we would do the next day. And I agreed to come up and see him. I'd been in hotel rooms with him before with other staff. There was no one there. The lights had been dimmed. I was a little concerned about that, but I took a seat and we did talk about the media event. And then the discussion became a bit more personal about marriages, mine and his. And I decided, okay, I really would like to leave. And I stood up and he embraced me a little bit too tight, too long. And I felt that he was aroused and I left the room. We never talked about it. And I never told anyone except one of my best friends who I called that night to tell her what had happened. But, this was a long time ago. And I'm from an older generation of women. And I didn't really think that if I told someone I might lose my career, I would hurt my career. So I didn't. And praise to those 11 women who did.
So you did speak with the investigators. You shared your story with them. They didn't include it as one of the complainants in this filing, but you said they did listen to you.
Oh, yes. They were very interested in talking about his pattern of behavior over time. And I've known Andrew Cuomo for a long time, 25 years. And this report describes him to a T. And I was shocked, but I wasn't shocked. And I think that the Assembly is right to go ahead and fast forward their impeachment inquiries, because I think he probably won't resign, even though the president has called for him to resign. And I think the AG's office, the investigators, were very interested in that pattern over time.
When you say what's in this report describes him to a T, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think the flirting, the intimidation, the manipulation, the need to control, the need to scream and holler and get angry at people unnecessarily. That was the Andrew Cuomo that I know, over these 2 decades. That is a pattern that he's always performed. And it's been concerning to me for a very long time. And I wish I had spoken out more about it, but it wasn't ever in this kind of context. And I'm glad that these 11 women did that, because I think they really empower other women to do it, not just in politics, but in a range of fields where women face sexual harassment, in the news media, in entertainment, but also if you work at a grocery store, it happens. If you work in a doctor's office, it happens. A restaurant, a law firm, wherever, it happens because it's so pervasive.
What role were you in when you said you observed him over several decades? Were you working in his office, or were you in and out in a work capacity?
I was, of course, for a time in his office when I was his press secretary in Washington, D.C. And then after that, I maintained a professional relationship as well as a personal relationship over time, because I did marry someone who worked for him at HUD and then later worked for him in the governor's office. So I had opportunities to be around him and see him over time.
Why do you think that more women, and you've just alluded to this about how difficult it is to come forward, but why do you think more women, more people who work for him haven't spoken out publicly over the intervening years?
I think it's really difficult. It's very hard to speak up. We've been basically programmed to shut up and be silent, and for women have over the years. And so I think it's hard to break that pattern. I think that the Me Too movement did a lot to help empower women. And so we need to keep that movement going. And what I really want to see is not just for women to speak out, but for men to act right. It's just not that hard to treat women with respect and as professionals. And that's all that these 11 women really want, is to be treated with respect and professionally. And we don't need an attorney general to help a man do that.
Well,
But
it's
that's
an
what-
important, it is an important, certainly set of developments today. And Karen Hinton, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
The Biden administration is announcing a new, more limited moratorium on evictions tonight. It will apply to counties experiencing substantial and high levels of COVID transmission and will expire on October 3rd. More than 6 million people are behind on their rent, and there's been great concern that too many could face life-changing choices if evicted during this pandemic. The Supreme Court had struck down a ban on evictions that finally expired this past weekend. But today, the Centers for Disease Control issued a new order. Democrats in Congress, who had pressed hard for a new moratorium, celebrated, saying they had changed the political dynamics in just a few days. That included Congresswoman Cori Bush of Missouri, who once faced homelessness herself, and New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
It also goes to show that I think the typical laws of physics that we think about in politics, there's no way you can do anything when Congress is in recess. There's no way that we can get it done. On Friday, they said fat chance. On Saturday, they said you're doing this in vain. On Sunday, they said maybe we can do something about this. And, you know, lo and behold, a couple days later, thanks to just the people-powered direct action and just honestly, just the stubbornness for a better world. Get it done.
Stephanie Sy has the latest on this eviction breaking news tonight.
Judy, the new moratorium will limit how many people could be evicted, and it's said to be aimed at helping renters in areas that are especially hard hit by COVID. In addition, Congress already has authorized $46 billion that could be used for rental assistance to help those in trouble and facing debt. But just a small fraction of that money, roughly $3 billion, has been allocated and is making its way down to renters and their landlords. A number of advocacy groups and a growing number of progressive voices in Congress had pressured President Biden to enact a new moratorium and fight for it in court if need be. And the president said today he is not yet sure if it will survive legal challenges. Let's get some reaction to the news and take a deeper look at what people are facing on the ground. Zach Newman is with the Colorado COVID Eviction Project and joins me now. Zach, thank you so much for your time. So assuming this temporary eviction moratorium can be extended, what will this mean for people you work with?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and good to be here to talk about the moratorium. The extension of the moratorium will immediately help families in our community. It means that lawyers representing tenants at risk of eviction actually have real defenses to use in court. And more importantly, it means that the $46 billion allocated by the Biden administration has the opportunity to reach renters before it's too late.
Okay, but there is word, Zach, that not everyone would get relief from this extension of the moratorium. What kind of pressures are your clients dealing with since the original temporary moratorium expired on Saturday?
Yeah, we've seen a historic number of intakes over the past 3 days. This is emails, this is phone calls, this is referrals from our community partners. We've never seen anything like this. Presumably, this moratorium would be extended to cover folks in Denver and Colorado where we work, or at least a good chunk of the state. And what that means immediately is that we would be able to provide those folks with a real defense in court and also process their rental assistance applications in a way that means hopefully the money gets there before that eviction case has a chance to make its way through the court system.
Are you talking to clients who are really concerned about homelessness at this point, that really could see their families and children turned out on the streets?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's happened throughout the year, and it's happened during the moratorium that was in place. I had a client last year who was evicted. Her husband was going through hospice care, end-of-life care. Her 12-year-old son was trying to go to school on Zoom, and we didn't have enough money to pay the rental assistance balance. This was before the federal program was in place. She was evicted and she was forced to move into a hotel. So there are real people behind these numbers. There are real lives at stake. And when an eviction happens, it destroys a family. There's not a lot left for them and creates real challenges. And so the work towards a moratorium, to extend the moratorium and to move that money faster really does make a difference for families in our community.
And they are not necessarily any safer in the long term here. SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, has already ruled against the CDC's authority to enact these temporary eviction moratoriums. So are you expecting that this just buys time?
You know, it's hard to say what SCOTUS will do. What I think is so important here is that even 2 or 3 months makes an enormous difference for the folks we represent. It gives them a chance to put in an emergency rental assistance application. It gives the state and the counties a chance to process that. It gives payment a chance to arrive. Really, when you're dealing with the eviction timeline, which is incredibly fast moving, even a couple of days, a couple of weeks can make a really big difference if that money gets there before the judge has a chance to rule. And so while this may not be long lasting, even a few more days here really, really, really may make a difference for our clients.
We are hearing a lot of stories, and you referred to this, from renters and small landlords who have applied for assistance, and it's just taking a long time to get relief checks out. Why has it been so hard to get these funds to people who need it?
Yeah, a few reasons. One, the manner in which Congress allocated the money means that the application process can be lengthy. It does take time. Tenants have to provide documents. Landlords have to provide documents. There's a review process associated with that. And then, of course, on the back end of that, the check actually has to go out the door. That's part of it. The second part, though, is that states and counties haven't had to do this at this scale maybe ever. So you don't have the staff, you don't have the system, you don't have the capacity to move that money quickly. And so a lot of what we're seeing is state and county partners that are working as hard as they can. They're working overtime, but it just takes time to get these applications through the system.
So what do you do? How do you advise clients that might be enrolled in rental assistance or waiting to be enrolled and are worried at this point about getting evicted before their application is approved?
So there are a few things that really make sense here. The laws vary by state. The jurisdictions are different. There are free legal services available in your community through federal legal services. Look it up, reach out to an attorney. Talking to someone who knows the process can really make a difference. That's your first stop if you've already applied for rental assistance. And the second thing is talk to your landlord. Let your landlord know that you've applied for the money, that federal funds are available, that money is on the way. Knowing that the check is in the mail may change your landlord's mind and may buy some time on the back end of this process.
Zach Newman with the Colorado COVID Eviction Project. Thank you so much for your expertise and your time.
No, thanks for having me tonight. Appreciate it.
In the day's other news, mandates for COVID-19 vaccination spread to more of the country as the Delta variant surges. New York became the nation's first big city to require proof of shots for indoor dining, theaters, and gyms. Tyson Foods ordered its 120,000 employees to get vaccinated. It is one of the first big employers of frontline workers to do so. And Microsoft said starting in September, anyone entering its buildings must be vaccinated. Also today, major U.S. automakers announced that unionized workers must return to work wearing masks tomorrow. In Florida, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis rejected any new restrictions today. He spoke in Miami after news that COVID hospitalizations in the state hit a record for the third straight day.
We're not shutting down. We're going to have schools open. We're protecting every Floridian's job in this state. We're protecting people's small businesses. These interventions have failed time and time again throughout this pandemic, not just in the United States, but abroad. They have not stopped the spread, and particularly with Delta, which is even more transmissible.
President Biden today criticized governors who have blocked vaccination and masking requirements. He said, quote, "If you aren't going to help, please get out of the way." A Pentagon police officer was stabbed to death today at a transit station outside the Pentagon. The building was put on lockdown for part of the day. It was widely reported that officers shot and killed the suspect at the scene. There was no word on a possible motive. In Afghanistan, the Taliban accelerated its gains, moving to capture a provincial capital for the first time in years. Insurgents gained control of nearly all of Lashkar-Gah in Helmand province, and desperate civilians tried to flee.
I am leaving. Everyone has left. There's bombing from the air, and Taliban are on the ground.
Meanwhile, an explosion in Kabul apparently targeted the acting defense minister. He was unhurt, but at least 6 others were killed, including 4 gunmen. A Belarusian exile was found hanged today near his home in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. Vitaly Shishov led a group that helps people fleeing the authoritarian government in Belarus. Ukrainian police said they are investigating the death as a possible murder, staged to look like a suicide. A major forest fire is burning on the outskirts of Athens, Greece tonight, forcing thousands to flee their homes. Water-dropping tanker planes and helicopters attempted today to drown the flames. Huge clouds of smoke rose as the fire spread. The fire is feeding off of one of the country's worst heat waves in decades. On Wall Street, stocks made modest gains as investors kept an eye on how new pandemic restrictions might affect the economy. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was up 278 points to close at 35,116. The Nasdaq rose 80 points. The S&P 500 added 36. And at the Summer Olympics, an American star returned to competition. Gymnast Simone Biles won bronze on the balance beam after sitting out other events to focus on her mental health. And in pole vaulting, American Chris Nilsson won silver, while Sweden took the gold. Still to come on the NewsHour, how the infrastructure deal aims to boost broadband across the U.S., why wildfires hit Western families unequally. A sculptor changes perspective, marveling viewers for decades, and much more.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
The Senate is debating a $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill this week that would invest in vital public works projects throughout the country. One key portion expands broadband internet access for millions of Americans. Lisa Desjardins explains.
Among the larger pieces in this bill is $65 billion set aside for high-speed broadband internet, an area long seen as having big gaps and disparities. Right now in America, some 30 million people either have no internet or they get it at speeds too slow to access the modern web. Another 100 million have some access, but they don't subscribe to broadband, many because they can't afford it. This deal addresses both, with a large amount to expand to new communities and $14 billion to help with affordability. To help us understand what all this means, I'm joined by Nicole Turner-Lee, Senior Fellow and Director of the Center for Technology and Innovation at the Brookings Institution. Nicole, tell us, who are we talking about in terms of Americans who don't have high-speed internet, and what does that actually mean in their lives?
The pandemic has definitely demonstrated that being connected mattered, right? Whether you were a school-aged child that needed to be online to get access to learning, whether you're remotely working, whether you're somebody who could not go into a hospital and it was important for you to actually see your doctor via telehealth. Having a connection mattered. And I think the infrastructure bill, Lisa, is really telling us that we've got to find ways so that we can break through the equitable aspects of this, the affordability of broadband, where it's actually deployed, and make sure that no one is ever left offline again.
What do you think this money can actually do? Is it the kind of, I hear generational shift being said at the Capitol a lot. Is this a generational shift in terms of technology in this country, potentially?
Well, it's a generational shift in the form of including broadband as one of the critical infrastructures in this country, right? We normally think of infrastructure as electricity, as water systems, transit, and now we're actually seeing that a data infrastructure, a communications infrastructure matters. So I think going forward, that is a huge generational shift from when we actually saw the New Deal era programs that came out of the Great Depression. With that being the case, I think what we're also realizing is that this technology is not just about the haves and the have-nots. It's really about people who are leveraging the technology to be able to apply for jobs, to get access to employment and medical care opportunities, and as I said, schooling. So the question that's going to come out of this bill is, are we going to be able to solve, I think, some of the big things that it's going to do? Universal access. Who actually has access to broadband? Are they being redlined out of having access? Are they included, in areas where it's going to be easy to deploy it, like rural communities? The question of equity. How do we make sure that people have equal access to adopt the technology and use it for the very purposes that we've discussed? And I think affordability. People are making really hard decisions now between broadband and bread. And I think what the bill is actually going to do is allow some leeway through some of the incentives for subsidy towards the broadband bills that people are actually carrying, so they don't have to make those hard choices. Right now, people need to be online to actually survive. And I think that's going to be a big part of economic recovery.
You mentioned rural communities. We know one of the groups that does have trouble with internet connectivity is farmers. And our team today reached out, spoke with a Wisconsin Farmers Union representative, and this is what she told us about the problem for her farmers.
It's caused great concern, especially this last year. I mean, even with things like getting their kids on the internet so that they can attend school virtually, but it also has a financial impact on the bottom line for farmers because they need to be up online in order to sell directly if they're like doing direct market sales. We've got members whose businesses have been hampered by their lack of broadband access.
Nicole, what are the real economic effects for this country of having such a spotty internet map right now?
I think that is a great question. And, having done this for over 20 years, I think part of what we're seeing is we need to make these investments, but we need the data to know where we have to target them. The experiences of small farmers today, they are obviously competing against larger farmers in the footprints that they're in, but they also, in some cases, they don't want to go to precision agriculture, right, which is the next wave of advanced technological use. They want to simply be able to order equipment. And so I think it's a real cause when we have farmers and other local businesses that cannot get online because they have to be digitized in order to survive. And so this bill, I think, allows some leeway to actually give some recovery to those entities.
Farmers have a problem with access at all, but in the cities in this country, there's a huge problem with affordability. What do you think that this bill could do about that?
Well, one thing I like about the bill is actually presenting a solution that is an American problem. So on the rural side of this, we know that we're going to have topographical challenges when it comes to connecting places where there are more cows and than people. On the urban side, we need to work on competition. People should have a variety of choices of where they can actually access service, and that's not always the case. And the only way that you can reduce prices is if you make sure that people can actually have a potpourri of choice when it comes to getting access to digital services. And so, given the fact that we have so many uses of technology right now to be able to move things remotely versus in person, it's so important that we address both the urban challenges and the rural, but we also address them together, because together the country needs to actually move in a way that we have full connectivity.
If this bill passes, becomes law in 5 years from now, where do you think we'll be with this problem?
I am hoping in 5 years from now that we'll actually solve this digital divide that has plagued the country prior to the pandemic. But if we're not, I think we'll be one step closer to understanding just how important it is for people to have access to 21st century resources. No longer can we rest upon the laurels of being in line. We really need to make being online a human reality, because that's where society is going.
Nicole Turner-Lee of the Brookings Institution, thank you so much.
As we've been reporting for the past few weeks, wildfire season is here. In California alone, fires have already burned more acres than at this time last year. Sonoma County, north of San Francisco, where wine vineyards dot the landscape and tourism is a billion-dollar industry, wildfires are now part of daily life. Stephanie Sy is back now with how it affects certain groups who's worse than others, part of our Race Matters series.
The Tubbs Fire in 2017, the Kincaid in 2019, and last year's Glass Fire, which forced tens of thousands of evacuations in the midst of the pandemic. Worsening wildfires in California's wine country seem to burn houses and hovels indiscriminately, but advocates say the workers who toil in fields to produce some of the world's most expensive wines in the shadow of multi-million-dollar homes risk losing much more.
As humans, we deserve to be treated as equals.
Maria Salinas was a farm worker in Sonoma County for years. Now she advocates for the thousands of indigenous Mexican and Central American people living in the region, populations who may find themselves especially vulnerable during wildfire season. For example, they may not understand emergency alerts and evacuation orders.
When there are natural disasters, the announcements don't get to this community because they're only in English or Spanish.
Spanish is not understood by many of the indigenous Mexican and Central American workers in the region. And even if they did speak it, a statewide audit after the 2017 fires revealed the county only sent emergency warnings in English. That has since changed. In recent years, Salinas and other organizers have made direct contact with indigenous community members to make sure people know fires are approaching.
On the radio or on Facebook, they're saying that people need to evacuate or go to a shelter, but these messages are never translated into indigenous languages. Also, many indigenous people feel uncomfortable going to shelters because no one speaks their language.
Even when they do get the message, there are additional concerns, especially for the some 40,000 undocumented immigrants in the county.
They fear that immigration authorities will ask for their documents or question them about their status. To live here as an immigrant without papers is very scary.
Another vulnerability here is economic. The loss of work during wildfires can be devastating, and the fire season often coincides with the wine harvest.
Harvest season for farm workers is one of the most critical times for income generation during the entire season.
Alegria de la Cruz is the director of the Office of Equity for Sonoma County, which was created after it became apparent that last year's dual pandemic and wildfire crises had an outsized impact on Latino, undocumented, and indigenous people. She says farm workers are protected by California's relatively strict labor laws, even if undocumented, but enforcement often lags.
We have the strongest labor laws in the country, and they're still not enough. We don't have the sufficient amount of enforcement resources to make those rights true, right, to make them real.
Advocates say with another wildfire season upon them, not enough has been done to protect the workers who are the backbone of the wine country economy. Grapes don't like smoke. In the past, certain wineries might be granted access to their vineyards even if they fell in evacuation zones. Workers might find themselves trying to save the grapes near wildfires while potentially endangering themselves.
When the fires started coming, we were called into work.
Annabelle Garcia has been a farm worker in Sonoma for 20 years. She came face to face with wildfire in 2017.
They sent messages to the whole group who were responsible for harvesting grapes, so we had to go. We had red eyes and itchy throats from the smoke.
It sounds like you were working in an evacuation zone. Did you know that you were working in an evacuation zone?
All we knew was that we were being called into work. We didn't have another option because during the harvest, this is our only income that we use to pay rent and our bills.
Were you getting paid extra?
No. You only receive a check for the hours that you've worked during emergencies like this.
In recent months, Garcia worked with the local nonprofit North Bay Jobs with Justice to survey dozens of farm workers about their experiences during wildfires. They came up with 5 demands to mitigate the impacts of the disasters on low-wage workers in Sonoma County. Multilingual messaging, disaster insurance, community safety observers, premium hazard pay, and clean bathrooms and water. But Carissa Cruz, president of the Sonoma County Wine Growers, says there are adequate protections for workers, and the fires also put growers in a difficult spot.
So when you talk about actual harvest, if our growers don't harvest a grape, it's not that they are missing a couple of weeks where they didn't get to work as the farmer, it's that they have zero income. Zero.
One estimate shows wine companies suffered losses as high as $3.7 billion during last year's wildfire season.
The farmers can get through a few years of dealing with the financial impact, and then they lose the ranch. And at some point, there is that breaking point that, really impacts agriculture and potentially makes our family farming community not be a family farming community.
But whether it's the growers or government, Annabelle Garcia wants to see more resources put towards worker safety and economic security.
Those who drink wine have no idea what it takes to make the wine, from planting to harvest. We don't have any kind of support.
And she believes the country's farm workers have earned it. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Stephanie Tsai in Sonoma County, California.
This week, the Biden administration is sending its most senior official yet to Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. USAID Director Samantha Power is putting pressure on the Ethiopian government and its Nobel Peace Prize winning prime minister to alleviate a humanitarian crisis in the country's Tigray region. But as Nick Schifrin reports, the Ethiopian government seems determined to target Tigray.
In Addis Ababa, the army's newest recruits wrap themselves in the Ethiopian flag. They pledge to give their blood, literally, in a war the government calls existential.
Our recruits shall bury the enemy and make sure Ethiopia's sovereignty is respected.
That enemy is in Tigray in northern Ethiopia, led by the local government Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, or TPLF. Today, Ethiopia's federal government is waging war against Tigray not with arms, but food. 5 million Tigrayans don't have the means to eat and rely on aid, but many World Food Program trucks are blocked by the Ethiopian government. The last convoy allowed into Tigray was 3 weeks ago, a fraction of what's needed to stop starvation.
This is a really large humanitarian disaster.
Marixie Mercado of UNICEF just returned from Tigray. She saw an acute crisis. Last month, hundreds of Tigrayan women lined up with the most vulnerable victims. UNICEF says over the next year, 100,000 Tigrayan children face life-threatening malnutrition, 10 times the normal number. Nearly 500,000 are facing famine. Aid workers handed out high-calorie, vitamin-fortified biscuits to try and save children's lives.
there's very little or none of the therapeutic food that these severely acutely malnourished children need in order to survive. There's almost no electricity. There's no antibiotics. So all of this put children at huge risk.
Unless we act now, then we will witness, and of course we will shoulder the responsibility of losing the lives of millions in Tigray.
Yohannes Abraha represents the TPLF overseas. Until last year, he worked for the Ethiopian government. He now accuses them of withholding food as a weapon of war and risking a repeat of the famine 40 years ago that killed 1 million Ethiopians.
If they don't get the necessary and emergency food aid, then we will witness the catastrophic famine that we have witnessed in Ethiopia in the 1970s, 80s.
The Ethiopian government says the crisis started late last year when Tigrayan forces attacked a federal outpost. Federal forces and their allies from neighboring Eritrea and the Amhara region waged a scorched earth campaign in occupied parts of Tigray. Humanitarian groups accused them of crimes against humanity, including indiscriminate killings and widespread rape. But in late June, Tigrayan forces pushed federal Ethiopian soldiers out of Tigray. They paraded Ethiopian and allied Eritrean prisoners through the streets. In Addis Ababa, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed claimed he had withdrawn from Tigray for a humanitarian ceasefire.
His decision to pull out for humanitarian reasons may, in fact, have been a cover for military defeat.
Ambassador Johnny Carson served as the top U.S. diplomat in numerous African countries and is now senior advisor at U.S. Institute of Peace.
The Ethiopian military has, in fact, been seriously damaged, even decimated by the conflict in the north.
And so humanitarian groups say the federal government is now regrouping and turning to other ethnic militias to target Tigray. Tigray is fighting neighboring Amhara over territories that both claim as their own. This video purportedly shows a priest blessing Amharan fighters. Tigray also created a new front in the eastern region of Afar, where local fighters are being backed up by militias from Oromia.
Defense forces of Tigray are duty-bound to neutralize such forces. So yes, they were crossing borders from Tigray and attacked these forces.
But claiming to defend territory by expanding past its own borders is exactly what senior U.S. officials urged Tigray not to do. And now the ethnic violence is spreading further. Militias in Afar are fighting in the far eastern Somali region. Hundreds of Somali residents, mainly women and children, recently gathered to protest. The increasing ethnic violence now means the conflict could be existential for the entire country.
The current Ethiopian crisis puts Ethiopia at risk of collapse as a unified state. There is a great deal of concern about balkanization and about potential fragmentation.
A military dictatorship known as the Derg ruled for 17 years before TPLF rebels helped topple it in 1991. They divided the country into 10 states on sometimes fragile ethnic lines and often persecuted their opponents. Adote Akwe leads Amnesty International's Africa team.
The country it's cracking on fault lines because the system that kept it together was autocratic and repressive and very violent, and that system has broken down.
Abiy took power from the TPLF in 2018 and promoted himself as creating a new democratic era. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for brokering peace with Eritrea after 2 decades of hostilities. But their mutual enemy is Tigray, and Abiy refers to the TPLF as weeds and Ethiopia's cancer. The Biden administration has tried to pressure Abiy's government to stand down, including during this week's visit to the region by USAID Director Samantha Power. But humanitarian groups say the pressure needs to increase.
Really need to turn up the pressure to say this is not only very dangerous, but it's also putting millions of lives at risk.
And without a political solution, that risk to lives and the country will become more dire. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin.
An alternative perspective is what artist Mel Kendrick has offered for 40 years. Special correspondent Jared Bowen of GBH Boston takes us to the Addison Gallery of American Art in Andover, Massachusetts, to see why Kendrick's art has such staying power. It's part of our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
The name of this show is Seeing Things in Things, which is essentially what artist Mel Kendrick has been doing since the 1970s. Where we might see a plain old birch tree, he sees it from the inside out.
The only way I could do this was cutting it into many small pieces and then removing the core and reassembled it exactly the way it grew in the tree. The wood grain is matched up all the way through.
For most of his career, Kendrick has always gone out on a limb, dismantling them actually, along with trees and logs, so that they can be reassembled.
In all these pieces, you can match up the holes and see what's going on, but it always brings up the whole question, is like, what am I making? What am I making? Why is this interesting to me?
They're questions that have sustained Kendrick through a 40-some-odd-year career, charted out here in his first ever retrospective at the Addison Gallery of American Art. Kendrick came of age as a New York artist when minimalism reigned. Where artists like Frank Stella stripped art down to its barest forms, Kendrick was building it back up. In other words, going against the grain.
I was heavily influenced by the artists I was meeting, the older artists, and I kept trying to break through to find something that was my own.
So he stayed with sculpture, something the art world had written off by the time he had a significant early career show of his small works in 1983.
I literally went into that show and I thought, okay, I could get emotional about it. Okay, I've done all that I can do. And if they don't sell, if no one likes them, I'll give them all to my friends. Didn't turn out that way.
I really can't think of anyone I would compare him to, which is what makes, for me, this show so exciting. And
Allison Kemmerer is the curator of the show, really a show of shows, where each gallery offers a different body of work.
As you wander through, you will participate in this show. These works demand physical engagement. They suck you in. You're asking yourself, what is this? You need to walk around them to fully understand them and process them.
Often the answer, despite Kendrick's best efforts, is that these are beings of some sort, with their craggy legs and humanistic forms.
Mel is adamant about avoiding any link to the representational world, but of course, we all see that. I imagine Nemo, the insect-like, full room-sized sculpture, when we turn off the lights at night, as making his rounds around the museum. I mean, it's all about motion.
And made in motion. Kendrick never sketches, draws, or designs his sculptures beforehand.
He sees wielding the chainsaw much like wielding a pencil, and that the shapes that he enforces onto wood, curves and arabesques and holes, are not things naturally akin to the material. It's more a painterly drawing process.
If I make a mistake, whatever a mistake is, something I don't like, I stick it back together with glue, and then I keep on. So I'm incorporating all those elements, and that, to me, is drawing.
The clues to Kendrick's how did he do that process are everywhere. The traces of paint, the ties, the armature, all locked into these single blocks of wood.
Well, what about your relationship with wood? Is it a relationship? Have you mastered it at this point?
I like to say I'm a very bad carpenter. But I started in construction. When I arrived in New York, I knew nothing about wood, so it's really the whole thing built up from literally building walls, building kitchen cabinets.
Wood does have the starring and frequently towering role here, and with appearances in his woodblock prints and photography. But occasionally, we find cameos by concrete and rubber.
This is sort of an architectural rubber, and I love the color, the amber, and it satisfied something in me to see the inside.
How often does beauty matter in your work?
Beauty as a concept is not something I go through, but I think it's one of those intangible things because how do you know what's beautiful if you've never seen it before? But the amber is beautiful. The light coming through it, I mean, these pieces near a window, it's fantastic. But in no way did I think this could be deemed a beautiful object. I think it's a very disturbing object or a very funny thing. I mean, this is.
And therein lies the beauty of Mel Kendrick, seeing the other side of things. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jared Bowen in Andover, Massachusetts.
It does pull you in. Thank you for that. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Judy Woodruff. Join us online and again here tomorrow evening. For all of us at the PBS NewsHour, thank you. Please stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by Consumer Cellular, Johnson & Johnson, financial services firm Raymond James, BNSF Railway, Carnegie Corporation of New York, supporting innovations in education, democratic engagement, and the advancement of international peace and security at carnegie.org. The Target Foundation, committed to advancing racial equity and creating the change required to shift systems and accelerate equitable economic opportunity. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.